The sound of diesel engines tearing through dawn silence pulled Marcus Brennan from his coffee at 6:14 a.m. Through his kitchen window. The 47-year-old civil engineer watched an excavator's steel teeth bite into his south pasture, ripping a 4-foot trench through land his family had owned for 3 generations. 8 acres of registered Texas ranch property. Legally surveyed and deed protected since 1952, the HOA president stood beside the machinery, clipboard in hand, directing workers like she owned the place. 3 months of threatening letters. 3 months of demands that Marcus surrender his unapproved livestock operation and join their residential covenant. 3 months of polite refusals backed by legal documentation they refused to read. But this morning was different. This morning, they crossed from harassment into destruction. And what Rebecca Sutton and her HOA board didn't know was that the quiet engineer they'd been bullying had spent those 3 months building an airtight legal case, and this trench was about to become evidence. Exhibit A before we dive into how Marcus turned construction. Equipment into courtroom evidence. If you love stories where property rights win and entitled boards finally meet their match, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's see exactly how this unfolded. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that pushed a respectful landowner past his breaking point. The confrontation where decades of property law met a shocked HOA board. And the resolution where a single survey map brought an entire organization to its knees. Picture 3 months of escalating pressure. Letters demanding compliance with rules that didn't apply. Threats of legal action from people who never bothered to check actual property boundaries. A man who'd inherited his grandfather's land, watching neighbors turn enemies, treat generations of family history like it was theirs to control. The toll it took on someone who valued peace. The moment when peaceful resistance became something else entirely. The night Marcus stopped hoping for reason and started preparing for war. Now imagine that first confrontation. The shock on entitled faces when property lines were revealed. The HOA president, realizing her entire offensive was built on a foundation that didn't exist. A quiet engineer speaking with the authority of someone holding every legal card. The power shift that happens when documentation meets delusion. The moment arrogance crumbled into panic. A board that thought they were enforcing rules discovering they just committed actionable trespassing. Finally, picture justice in a courtroom. A judge examining survey maps that told an undeniable story. An HOA's lawyer, realizing his clients had handed their opponent a perfect case. Consequences that reached far beyond one trench. A community watching their board face accountability for the first time. And one man standing in his pasture, watching contractors, this time hired by the court, restore what should never have been touched. Here's exactly how it happened. Marcus Brennan hadn't asked for a fight. At 47, the civil engineer had spent 2 decades designing infrastructure projects across 3 states, work that taught him the sacred importance of property boundaries and legal documentation. He'd inherited the 8-acre ranch property from his grandfather in 2019, the same Thomas Brennan who purchased the land. In 1952, when Harmony Hills was nothing but cattle country and dirt roads. The property sat on the eastern edge of what was now the Harmony Hills residential development, a community that had grown around Marcus's land over the past 30 years. His pasture housed 6 rescue horses, 3 goats, and a small stable he built with his own hands. Marcus worked from home 3 days a week, spent his weekends repairing fences and mucking stalls, and lived quietly in the original ranch house his grandfather had built. He'd watched the neighborhood transform, always maintaining friendly distance from HOA politics. He paid his county taxes, kept his animals healthy, and bothered no one. The property was his sanctuary after a divorce 2 years earlier. The one place where legal boundaries were clear and respected. The first letter arrived in late August, hand-delivered by Rebecca Sutton, the 52-year-old HOA president who'd moved into the development 5 years earlier. Marcus had been trimming fence posts when her silver Lexus pulled up to his gate. She'd introduced herself with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and handed him an envelope containing a courtesy notice that his livestock operation violated HOA covenants regarding commercial agricultural activities. Marcus had read it twice, confused, then politely explained that his property predated the HOA by 40 years and wasn't part of their jurisdiction. He'd even showed her his deed, complete with the original 1952 survey map and the county's confirmation that his 8 acres were explicitly excluded from the residential covenant. Rebecca had barely glanced at the documents before saying that things had changed, and the board expected compliance within 30 days. Marcus had watched her drive away, assuming that would be the end of it. Reasonable people accepted facts, he thought. He'd been wrong. 3 weeks later, the second letter arrived via certified mail. This one threatened legal action if Marcus didn't cease unauthorized agricultural operations and submit an application to join the HOA, complete with a $15,000 initiation fee to bring the property up to community standards. The letter referenced code violations that didn't exist and cited HOA bylaws that had no legal authority over his land. Marcus had called the HOA's attorney, a junior partner at a local firm who clearly never bothered to research the property history. The conversation lasted 4 minutes before the lawyer said he'd look into it and hung up. No follow-up came. Instead, 2 weeks after that, Marcus found Rebecca and 2 board members standing in his driveway taking photos of his stable, his fence line, and his horses. When he'd asked what they were doing, Rebecca had informed him they were documenting violations and suggested he get on the right side of this before it gets ugly. Marcus had stood there, jaw clenched, watching them catalog his life like inspectors at a condemned building. That night, he pulled out his grandfather's original survey documents and started making calls to property attorneys. The breaking point came on a cold October morning when Marcus discovered someone had filed a complaint with the county claiming his property was operating as an unlicensed commercial stable. The county inspector who showed up was apologetic but thorough, examining every structure and animal before confirming what Marcus already knew. He was in full compliance with all agricultural zoning laws. The inspector had even laughed, saying this was clearly a harassment complaint from neighbors who didn't understand property law. But the complaint had required Marcus to take a day off work, gather documentation, and defend his right to exist on his own land. As the inspector drove away, Marcus stood in his pasture and felt something shift. He was done being polite. He was done assuming reason would prevail. These people wanted a legal fight, and Marcus, who'd spent 2 decades navigating complex property disputes in his engineering work, was going to give them one they'd never forget. Marcus didn't call the HOA again. Instead, he hired Patricia Morrison, a 61-year-old property rights attorney who built her career dismantling overreaching HOAs. He had his land professionally resurveyed by a licensed Texas surveyor, complete with GPS coordinates and boundary markers. He gathered every piece of correspondence, every threatening letter, every documented interaction. He filed formal complaints with the county about harassment. He installed security cameras along his fence line. And he waited, knowing that people who'd ignored legal boundaries this long would eventually cross a line they couldn't uncross. If they wanted to play games with someone who understood infrastructure and property law better than they understood their own bylaws, Marcus would show them exactly what that game looked like when played by someone who actually knew the rules. And on November 12th, they gave him everything he needed. The excavator's engine cut through morning air like a chainsaw through silence. Marcus set down his coffee mug, grabbed his phone, and walked outside in his work boots and flannel shirt. The machine was already 20 feet into his property, its bucket dragging a trench 4 feet wide and 3 feet deep through pasture grass. His horses had grazed the day before. Rebecca Sutton stood near the fence line in a pantsuit and heels, gesturing to a 3-man crew like a general commanding troops. 2 other board members lingered by their cars, watching. Marcus started recording on his phone, then walked directly to the excavator. The operator saw him coming and cut the engine. Rebecca turned, and for a moment, Marcus saw genuine surprise cross her face. "Morning, Rebecca," Marcus said, his voice level and calm, the tone of someone who practiced this moment. "I need you to stop what you're doing right now." Rebecca's surprise vanished behind a mask of authority. She pulled out her clipboard and stepped forward. "Mr. Brennan, this is a drainage project approved by the board to address flooding issues affecting multiple properties. We sent you notice 2 weeks ago." Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that came before calculations. "I didn't get any notice. But more importantly, this is my property, and you're trespassing. So I'm asking you one time, very clearly, remove your equipment and your crew from my land immediately." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "This isn't your land. According to our survey, this is HOA common space designated for drainage infrastructure." Marcus pulled a document from his back pocket, unfolding it with deliberate slowness. "This is a certified survey completed 3 weeks ago by Texas licensed surveyor Michael Chun. See these GPS coordinates? You're standing 47 feet inside my property line. The HOA boundary ends at that fence post right there." He pointed to a post marked with fresh orange paint. Rebecca barely glanced at the paper. "Our records show otherwise. The board has authority to maintain community infrastructure, and this drainage project serves the greater good of Harmony Hills." Marcus nodded slowly, still recording. "Okay, so just to be clear, I've informed you that you're on private property without permission. I've shown you a licensed survey proving it, and you're refusing to stop. Is that accurate?" Rebecca's face flushed. "We have every right to be here. If you interfere with this project, the HOA will pursue legal action against you." Marcus pocketed his phone, then pulled out another document. "That's interesting, because I have here a cease and desist letter from my attorney, Patricia Morrison, formally notifying your board that any entry onto my property constitutes criminal trespassing and civil liability for damages. She sent this to your HOA attorney and to you personally last week. Did you not receive it?" The color drained from Rebecca's face, but she recovered quickly. "We received some letter, yes, but our attorney assured us we're within our rights." Marcus smiled again, colder this time. "Then your attorney is about to have a very bad day. Because he gave you advice that's going to cost your HOA about 6 figures in damages and legal fees." One of the other board members, a man named David Chin, stepped forward. "Look, we're just trying to solve a drainage problem. Maybe we can work something out?" Marcus turned to him. "David, right. You live at 412 Willow Creek Drive. Your wife, Karen, is on the landscape committee. You've been on the board for 3 years. David blinked, surprised. "How did you?" Marcus continued, his voice taking on an edge. "I know exactly who each of you are. I know you, David, push hardest for this drainage project because water pools in your backyard after heavy rain. I know Rebecca here wants my property added to the HOA because it would increase property values and give her bragging rights about expanding the development. I know that Tom Bradshaw over there by the Audi owns a landscaping company and conveniently got the contract for the post-project restoration work." He paused, letting that sink in. "I know all of this because I've spent 3 months documenting every meeting, every vote, every decision your board made regarding my property. And I know that not once did any of you bother to verify whether you actually had jurisdiction over land that's been privately owned since before your HOA existed." Rebecca's clipboard dropped to her side. Her voice cracked slightly. "This is ridiculous. You can't just—" Marcus cut her off. "Here's what's going to happen. Option 1. You leave right now. You hire a licensed surveyor to confirm what I already know. And then we go to court where a judge decides damages for trespassing, property destruction, and harassment. I have 3 months of documented communications, security footage of today's trespass, and an attorney who specializes in making examples of HOAs that overstep their authority. The county will bill you for restoration. I'll sue for lost use of my pasture, and your board members will be personally liable because you were explicitly warned." Or option 2, you stop this right now. You issue a formal apology in writing. You pay for professional restoration of this trench and any damage to my land, and you leave me alone permanently. You have about 30 seconds to decide. Rebecca looked at the other board members. Tom Bradshaw pulled out his phone, presumably calling their attorney. David Chun stared at the trench like he was seeing it for the first time. The excavator operator had already climbed out of his machine and was walking back to his truck. Rebecca opened her mouth, closed it, then tried one more time. You're making a huge mistake. The board will, Marcus's voice went cold as winter steel. The board will do nothing except stop trespassing on my land. My security cameras are recording this. The county is already aware of your harassment campaign. My attorney is waiting for my call to file a restraining order and sue every board member personally. You're done, Rebecca. The only question now is whether you leave quietly or whether I make this a public spectacle that destroys your credibility in this community forever. He pulled out his phone again. I'm calling the sheriff in 60 seconds. Your choice. Rebecca Sutton stood there, her pantsuit suddenly looking less like authority and more like costume. The clipboard trembled in her hands. She looked at the trench, at Marcus's implacable expression, at her fellow board members already retreating to their vehicles. Then she nodded once, sharp and bitter. Fine, we're leaving. But this isn't over. Marcus didn't smile. Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. He watched them pack up their equipment and drive away, Rebecca's Lexus kicking up dust as it fled down the road. Then Marcus stood in his torn pasture, looked at the gouged earth, and pulled up his attorney's number. By the time Patricia Morrison answered, Marcus was already photographing the damage from every angle. 3 months of harassment had just become evidence, and the HOA had handed it to him on a silver platter. The preliminary hearing happened 18 days later in the Kendall County Courthouse, a small proceeding that would set the tone for everything that followed. Marcus sat beside Patricia Morrison at the plaintiff's table, a 3-inch binder of documentation in front of them. Across the aisle, Rebecca Sutton and the HOA board looked significantly less confident than they had standing in his pasture. Their attorney, a junior partner named Blake Simmons, who couldn't have been older than 30, kept shuffling papers and whispering frantically to his clients. Judge Elizabeth Harmon, a 58-year-old former property attorney herself, reviewed the initial filings with an expression that grew progressively colder as she read. When she looked up, her first question was directed at the HOA's lawyer. Counselor, can you explain why your clients proceeded with excavation after receiving a cease and desist letter, documenting that the property in question was privately owned and not under HOA jurisdiction? Blake Simmons stood, tugging at his collar. Your Honor, the HOA board believed they had authority based on their interpretation of the community's boundaries and the public good nature of the drainage project. Judge Harmon raised an eyebrow. Did that interpretation involve consulting a licensed surveyor? Silence. Did it involve reviewing the original property deeds dating back to 1952? More silence. Did it involve anything other than assumption? Blake sat back down. Patricia Morrison stood with the calm confidence of an attorney who knew she'd already won. Your Honor, we're requesting an immediate preliminary injunction, preventing the HOA from any further contact with or action regarding my client's property, plus a temporary restraining order against all board members personally. Additionally, we're seeking expedited trial for damages, including property restoration, lost use, emotional distress, and punitive damages for harassment and trespassing after explicit legal warning. She slid a bound document across to the judge. This contains the complete chain of title for Mr. Brennan's property, 3 independent surveys confirming boundaries, security footage of the trespass, and documented communications showing the HOA was repeatedly informed of their lack of jurisdiction. Judge Harmon spent 15 minutes reviewing the materials while the courtroom sat in tense silence. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone deeply unimpressed. I'm granting the preliminary injunction effective immediately. The HOA is barred from any contact with Mr. Brennan or his property pending trial. I'm also ordering that the HOA immediately hire a licensed surveyor to confirm property boundaries at their expense and submit those findings to this court within 2 weeks. She looked directly at Rebecca Sutton. Ma'am, I want to be very clear. If your organization violates this order in any way, I will hold you and your board members in contempt. Do you understand? Rebecca nodded, her face pale. The judge set a trial date for February 15th. The surveyor's report arrived 12 days later, and it was everything Marcus needed. The licensed surveyor confirmed that Marcus's property extended exactly where his survey had shown, and that the HOA's drainage trench had been dug entirely on private land. More damaging, the surveyor noted that basic research of county records would have revealed this information within an hour. The HOA's entire legal position collapsed. Blake Simmons called Patricia Morrison 3 days before Christmas with a settlement offer, $75,000 for property restoration and damages, formal written apology, permanent recognition of property boundaries, and dismissal of all HOA claims. Patricia had laughed. Try again. My client's damages exceed $200,000 when you include restoration costs, lost property use, 3 months of stress, and the precedent-setting nature of your board's willful trespassing. Plus, Mr. Brennan wants a public apology at the next HOA meeting and a guarantee that this board will face accountability. The negotiation lasted 3 more weeks. The final settlement came together in late January, 3 weeks before the scheduled trial. The HOA agreed to pay $185,000 in damages and restoration costs. They were required to hire a professional contractor to restore the pasture, including topsoil replacement, reseeding, and erosion control. Rebecca Sutton and 2 other board members resigned their positions, and the HOA was required to conduct a special election for new leadership. Most importantly, the settlement included a permanent easement agreement formally recognizing Marcus's property boundaries and prohibiting any future HOA claims or contact. The agreement would be filed with the county and attached to the HOA's governing documents permanently. Patricia had also insisted on one final detail. At the next community meeting, the new board president would read a formal statement acknowledging the previous board's errors and apologizing to Marcus publicly. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome came from unexpected places. 3 other landowners on the edges of Harmony Hills contacted Marcus after word of the lawsuit spread. Each had faced similar harassment from the HOA, pressure to join or comply with rules that didn't legally apply to their properties. Marcus connected them with Patricia Morrison, and within 2 months, the HOA faced 3 more property rights lawsuits. The legal costs forced the organization to reassess its entire approach to boundary enforcement, and the new board implemented mandatory legal review before any action affecting non-member properties. Rebecca Sutton moved out of the development 6 months later, unable to face the community that had watched her authoritarian approach implode so spectacularly. One Saturday in late March, Marcus stood in his south pasture watching his horses graze on grass that had grown back thick and green. The professional restoration had exceeded expectations, leaving the land better than it had been before the trench. His neighbor to the west, an elderly woman named Claire, who'd lived there for 30 years, walked over with a pie and a smile. "I should have said something years ago," she told him. "Rebecca tried similar things with my property too, but I was too old to fight. Watching you stand up to them gave a lot of us courage." Marcus had thanked her, accepted the pie, and felt something settle in his chest that had been tense for months. This had never been about winning or revenge. It had been about defending something fundamental, the right to exist peacefully on land that was legally, rightfully, undeniably his. 2 months after that, Marcus received an invitation to speak at a County Property Owners Association meeting about HOA overreach. He'd stood at a podium in front of 80 people and told his story, showing the survey maps and the documentation trail that had saved his land. When someone asked what advice he'd give others facing similar situations, Marcus had smiled. Document everything. Know your property boundaries better than anyone else. Hire good attorneys before you need them. And never, ever assume that aggressive people are right just because they're loud. Sometimes justice doesn't come from compromise. Sometimes it comes from standing on a survey map from 1952 and refusing to move until they prove you wrong. They couldn't. They never could have. Because the land was always mine, and no clipboard or board vote or drainage project was ever going to change that. Marcus Brennan still lives on his 8 acres. His horses still graze in the pasture. His property is still marked by GPS-verified boundary markers that no one questions anymore. And when he sits on his porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over land 3 generations of his family have called home, he smiles. Because justice, whether served in a courtroom or a pasture, is equally satisfying when it comes from standing your ground on ground that's rightfully yours. Across the country in Boulder, Colorado, retired environmental lawyer Margaret Fields was tending her native plant garden when her HOA demanded she replace it with approved traditional landscaping within 14 days. Margaret, who'd spent 30 years litigating environmental protection cases, calmly pulled out the state's native species conservation law and the city's water conservation ordinance she'd helped draft. "Please," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who defeated corporations 10 times the size of this little HOA. "I'd absolutely love to know who thinks they can force me to violate state conservation law on my own property." The board president's face went from red to white in record time. But that's a story for another time.